Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Urban Institute. Glad to welcome you all to City Talk and to really a fabulous, fabulous topic. And with great people coming from around the world, actually, to talk about the legacy of Jane Jacobs and how it is exemplified in Jane's Walk. I happen to be in Toronto, as you can see today. I was in Ottawa yesterday, tomorrow, and then Halifax, but today is Thursday, and I am in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many Inuit, First Nations and Inuit peoples. As many of you know, we try to make a practice here to make sure that we're acknowledging the traditions, but also the legacies of our ancestral roots and whose territories we occupy or have settled on. So in the case of Toronto, covered under a treaty, many of you are coming in unceded from unceded places, but Toronto has a treaty, the Williams Treaty and Treaty 13. And it's home to has been Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee peoples, Huron-Wendat. And we continue to explore what the legacies look like on this, and appreciate everyone contributing as best they can to remind us all about the legacies of exclusion that urbanism perpetuates through a number of colonial practices. So here we are, and going to talk together about something pretty fundamental, taking our eyes to the street and walking on them or seeing them or rolling on them or being present in actual places. So I've got a number of guests that are going to come on and talk about their experience of, particularly of Jane's Walk and of Jane Jacobs, and how they see that as being relevant. But I also I was just showing in the practice round here that I have a t-shirt that I can only really wear a couple of days a year, but here it is. There it is. That's my favorite T-shirt, and New Yorkers will know what the Marc Jacobs reference is, and perhaps one of them will punch into the chat why we want more Jane Jacobs and less Marc Jacobs. And also, we encourage people in the chat to share any reflections they'd like to about Jane's work, Jane's legacy, their experience with the Jane's Walk. I suspect many of you have led Jane's Walks or participated on them. They've been going for almost 20 years, and as I suggested, just a wonderful illustration of a remarkable set of ideas that were introduced by someone who made her home initially born in Scranton, then went to New York, and then eventually came to Toronto. And Torontonians are very proud of their association with Jane, as are New Yorkers. Slightly different kind of temperament, I would say, that the residents of both cities express this attachment to this figure. But let's have that conversation. So welcome to City Talk. Glad to have everybody here. I'm going to go first, if I can, to Celia to come on and talk to us a little bit about her particular experience of Jane's Walk, and just tell us where you are now, Celia, and just a little bit of your own history, your sort of association with Jane's Walk and with Jane, and what your sort of sense would be now. Why do you think Jane's Walk matters now in 2025?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So, hi everyone. My name is Celia. I'm currently based in London, UK, but as you can maybe tell from my accent, and I'm from Canada. I'm from Vancouver originally, but moved to Toronto and spent a few years there, and that's where I became acquainted with Jane's Walk. So I have been involved with the steering committee for a number of years. I was the co-chair for, I think, I always struggle to remember exactly how many years, I think around 3 years or so, with my partner in crime, Wes, who is not on the call. But we've since transitioned and passed on the torch to Sarah, who is one of the co-chairs who is on the call. But basically, my sort of origins with Jane's Walk kind of stem back to me becoming acquainted with the city of Toronto, and wanting to understand the city better that I had just moved to, hearing about this wonderful organization that was literally about city dwellers or residents themselves being the experts on their cities, and so being the ones to lead walks in their city. And I thought that was just such a fantastic idea. So I first volunteered as a photographer and went around to as many walks as I could, documenting them through photographs, and became really, really, I just fell in love with the festival and everything it stood for. And so became involved with the steering committee shortly after, and have been involved, I think, for about, I don't know, coming up on, I think, like 5 years now, or just over 5 years. And I became so passionate about it that I think, like Wes and I often talk about how it really shaped our careers and our trajectory, both personally and professionally. And so I ended up doing a master's in urban studies where I hopped around and lived in 4 different cities over 2 years. And so it was very much like a program that was kind of carried that essence of Jane's Walk as well, living and breathing and experiencing your cities that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I have now found myself in London, UK, working for a local council as a service designer, so improving the services that they offer. And in terms of why, I think Mary, your kind of question was why is this relevant today? Like why is Jane's Walk in particular relevant today and important? And I think the biggest thing that for me that comes to mind is sharing dialogue and generating empathy for people who might come from vastly different experiences as you. And so I heard some very magical stories when writing my thesis actually on Jane's Walk, which was about the notion of belonging and whether participating in the Jane's Walk Festival or festivals or organizations like Jane's Walk can help instill a sense of belonging in cities, especially cities that are quite diverse like Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, and that's, I won't say too much about that research. Happy to kind of dig into it more later, but I will say that what came through for me is really that, how do we relate to other people? How do we relate to ideas of difference? And I think Jane's Walk is a phenomenal tool to kind of bridge the gap between difference and generate empathy for, uh, yeah, people that are different from you. So that's what
It,
I would say in a
it's
nutshell.
in- it's interesting the what you're identifying as empathy building because I often say that cities are fundamentally about empathy. They put us into proximity with people that are in different circumstance, different background, different priorities, different values, and we're thrust into proximity so that we have to build empathy. So it's interesting what you're suggesting that you see
Yeah,
Jane's Walk is
absolutely.
about that and about connection and belonging. Where did you come from to move to Toronto
I came from Vancouver.
or
Yeah.
Vancouver? Right, you mentioned that. Sorry. So that you just came right in. Okay, well, isn't that great that something like Jane's Walk existed for you to be able to, and that you had the instinct to say, if I'm going to learn something about the city, I better learn about from the people that live here. Pretty great.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, I worked closely with Zara, who was formerly involved
Sorry,
with the
Ibrahim.
committee as well. Zara Ibrahim, who's
All right.
just a wonderful human being.
Right.
And so I found out about it through her initially. But yeah, from my thesis as well, I heard of so many people who actually used Jane's Walk in a similar way, where it was, okay, I've just moved to the city. I heard about this thing. I'm gonna use it to like learn more about my city, but also maybe have encounters with strangers and build connections in the city too.
Yeah, there is something about the stranger piece, isn't there? And how Jane's Walk sort of enables that, that suddenly you meet, it's random, you meet somebody. And I've been on Jane's Walks where the people that are on the walks, it gets bigger and bigger because strangers see the group and come over what's going on. Then they join too. And before you know it, by the time you finish the walk, you got a lot more people than you had before. Right. Okay. Well, great, Celia. Great to have your particular perspective on this. I'm going to invite, as we keep going, I'm going to keep sort of going around the circle here at the bit of the Hollywood Squares in terms of how we're going to sort of stitch together the narrative on this. So let's go to Calgary, where I'm sure it's a beautiful sunny day, Adam, isn't it? Always a sunny day in
Absolutely. The sun has melted all the snow we got over the weekend.
oh, be like that. Okay, well, at least
Hmm.
the snow is abated. So talk to us about the experience that your particular attraction to Jane's Walk, and the work of Jane Jacobs and what your experience has been and how's it look for you this year coming into the festival next weekend. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the James Walk Calgary edition is run by the Federation of Calgary Communities, where I work here, and we were able to take over the festival from the Calgary Foundation about 3 years ago.
Right.
Um, and yeah, since then we were kind of tasked with bringing it back to pre-COVID numbers, and I can successfully say we've blown past that this year with over 70 walks and currently on pace for over 2,000 participants, which is
Fantastic.
super, super exciting to see that this wasn't, something that we were going to let COVID take away from our city, but now more than ever, Calgary is a city that's, really having to change very fast in the face of, housing and different things. So it's more and more people are recognizing, that urban planning and, neighborly connections are more important than ever as we're facing some of these challenges. So that's why Jane's Walk is such a great tool for people to connect with one another, get to know each other, tell the stories of our neighborhood from the past, dream about the future in Jane's Walk. So it really is We have such a wide range of walks from, developers leading walks on their developments to seventh graders leading walks to the playgrounds in their neighborhood to nature walks, cultural walks and everything. So just to see that spread in interest in how people want to tell the stories of their communities and their neighborhoods is, super inspiring for us.
I appreciate the bit about storytelling. One of the interesting things about Jane Jacobs' writing style is that she was a storyteller too, and grounded a lot of her. If anyone, we always want to encourage people to not just do the walk, but do some research on Jane Jacobs. A good excuse to do that. Go read some of her books, and you'll see they're almost like fiction. They tell stories of particular circumstances, particular experiences, sometimes in made up places, but sometimes in real places. And so I hear you on that, Adam, why it's so valuable to have storytelling. And I'm also interested, as you suggest, that Jane's Walk is an interesting sort of post-COVID act of a way to demonstrate our commitment to the spatial city, that we get back, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just kind of maybe on the less fictional side, or I was reading Wrestling with Moses recently, which is a little bit more of kind of
Sure. Another
the
good book. Well, let me just warn everybody. Let's populate the chat. Here's our challenge to the City Talkers. Let's populate the chat with really interesting books that people can refer to. We always publish the chat afterwards. It's really valuable. And let's add Wrestling with Moses into that. There's a good list of books, Jane's own books. I'm sure my colleagues will start posting Jane's books of hers, but then there are books like Wrestling with Moses that are about Jane and about her particular battles. But go ahead, Adam. What did you?
No, that one's a little bit more of just kind of the, it's a little bit more of a factual account of how, Jane was taking over some of these projects and relating to her community. And like you said, of, the post-COVID age, I think what I was struck by was just kind of some of these movements in a non-digital age and the meetings in the living rooms and the way community halls are being used and different things. And I think coming out of COVID, I think that's a big theme too, is people wanting to escape some of those digital connections and really meet people in person. So I think, walking on the streets with, other people and chatting face to face is just what makes, I think, Jane's Walk so attractive to so many Calgarians.
Yeah, we're having to go counter-cultural a little bit. I had a very sobering statistic batted at me yesterday, which is that the number one use of AI are personal companions. Oh my goodness. Okay. So in that world, let's just remind ourselves that the actual physicality, the spatial reality of the city is really valuable. And appreciating that some people have disabilities that might restrict their capacity to actually be physically in the city in certain kinds of ways. The Jane's Walk concept is that you're in a community, just as Celia just mentioned, you're actually meeting strangers and you're having that kind of exchange. Adam, it's great to have you on City Talk. And of course, always happy to hear about more sun in Calgary. Let's now go to Toronto. We've got two folks in Toronto. Sarah, can we go to you first? And then we'll go to Mehedin, and then we're going to go to Genevieve. So Sarah, over to you. You took over you filled the boots that Celia left behind, I gather. So you're there coordinating the Jane Jacobs Festival. How's that going?
We're so excited about this year's Toronto Festival. We have an incredible lineup of activities. We're actually on track to break our record of submitted walks. So we're at about 140 walks. Last year we had 121. So we're really excited to kind of like blown past that. We're also hosting two panels, and they're both about designing public spaces, sort of this question of who belongs in public space, who gets to make the decisions about public space. I think we're also quite lucky in Toronto that we have some really, really incredible, innovative public design, public space, public engagement activities going on. So we're excited about those. And then we're also doing a free film screening in partnership with Innis College at University of Toronto. So we are screening Citizen Jane, which is the documentary, and we're quite excited about that to sort of walking is really important. And so, doing the actual getting out there, meeting with people, connecting with people, but we also wanted to provide different ways for folks to get engaged. So whether that's attending a virtual panel or coming to a film screening, like we want to make these principles and the festival as accessible as possible. So we're really excited. We have really like an incredible team on board this year. For those who may be unaware, all volunteer volunteer steering committee is about 13 people. And we're really lucky to have two amazing festival co-organizers with us this year. And yeah, I'd say I feel like I'm filling really, really big shoes because Wes and Celia have really done such an incredible job bringing Jane's Walk to not only Toronto, but really helping the festival take on this sort of life of its own and spread across not just Canada. Like we've got festivals, for example, in Vancouver. We've got festivals in Calgary and Ottawa and Windsor, Halifax, Guelph. Like they're happening all over. But it's also global. So Jane's Walk happens in about 500 cities across the world. And, it's really incredible when you see something that's just like a completely grassroots festival take off like this.
That's great. Sarah, it's wonderful. And as you suggest, it's grown and it grows differently in different places, which is it sort of takes on its own flavor. I see we have somebody in the chat from Cotter. I'm interested to know whether there's a Jane's Walk going to be in Cotter. Tell us, please, Cotter participant, if there might be a Jane's Walk, because it's not too late to lead one. The great thing about Jane's Walk is anyone can lead one. And so you get that fabulous, important Jacob's principle about diversity, welcoming diversity. One of the great things about Jane's Walks, if you were to read a list of them all, you would see remarkable diversity in terms of who's leading them and what they think is interesting. And back to Celia's comment that when she moved to Toronto, she thought, well, what better way to find out what's going on than hear from some locals? And it's so interesting to see what people propose as a Jane's Walk. It's not often predictable. So let's go to New York, and then Mahid, you're gonna do cleanup here at the end. Genevieve, you're in the city of great diversity, and not that we're too competitive here, Toronto and New York. But you just heard Sarah throw down the gauntlet that she's going to have 141 walks. How many in New York City, do you think?
We have 209.
109, just saying.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you are a wee bit bigger than Toronto, but
A little
nevertheless,
bit.
it's a happy little competition that we've got going. Talk to us about Jane's Walk in New York. Is it across the 5 boroughs? Tell you, of course, MAS runs walks year round, tours, but this is actually Jane's Walk. So talk to us about how it works for you, why it's appealing to you, what MAS's connection with it is.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Mary. And thank you for having me today. Yes, so Jane's Walk is hosted by the nonprofit that I work for, the Municipal Art Society of New York, or MAS in shorthand. And this nonprofit has been around for over 130 years. And we advocate for a more livable city across New York City's 5 boroughs, which includes Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Bronx, and Manhattan. And we do this advocacy through programming like Jane's Walk, along with education and policy, and all sorts of public programming and tours. And I feel that Jane's Walk is a really wonderful culmination of all of the work that we really care about. And we got involved doing the festival in 2011. And I think that when we first got involved, we had about 27 walks. And then now, of course, we have over 200. So it's a really exciting, culmination of the work that we do. We have a really rich history of doing advocacy and doing preservation. We helped create the Landmarks Commission in New York, and advocate for historic districts in New York, and there's also just certain zoning ordinances and things that we've advocated to support or not support, and the walks that we get each year really kind of match this history, and many of them are exploring things that MAS was involved in throughout our long history. And yes, the festival does happen in all 5 boroughs, like I said. And this year we're really excited. We have a lot of walks in the outer boroughs, which are the boroughs that are Manhattan. Manhattan's always the most popular borough to have walks in, but we have many in Queens and in Brooklyn as well. And it's always really exciting to see what organizations and individuals are leading walks. They are often led by city agencies and nonprofits, but then we also have a lot of individuals who either have their tour guiding license or people who are just really passionate about New York City who lead a walk about a topic that they're really passionate about. And yeah, Jane's Walk was really interesting to me. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to university in Columbus, Ohio, and I studied printmaking. But during my first year, I was also taking a lot of classes in city planning, and I learned about Jane Jacobs, as you do in your foundational city planning courses. And I was really inspired by her work. So honestly, a lot of the prints, the zines that I was making in my printmaking courses throughout college, like were related to her. And sometimes I would use like her text in my work. So I feel like I've always had this connection with her. Um, and then when I moved to New York after graduating from college, I found this job at the Municipal Art Society, and I learned about Jane's Walk, and it felt like the perfect role for me because I'm like, I love this girl. I'm, nerdy about her and her work. So it's felt really kismet. And also, I love Toronto. I grew up going to Southern Ontario to visit family throughout my childhood and visited Toronto a lot. And I feel that it's the first city outside of Cleveland that I really felt a connection to. So, along with just loving Jane Jacobs, being able to work with the steering committee and getting to know Celia and Wes has been a really special part of this experience for me. So, yeah, I'm really grateful to be here today to talk about Jane's Walk.
That's great. I just want to just shout out. I love your little expression. I love this girl. Jacobs, who was born in 1916, and I don't know if anybody ever called her a girl. Maybe she was one, but I knew what you meant. That's fantastic.
Mhm.
And it's always, as you suggest, it's part of, I don't know whether you track the Canadian media at all, Genevieve, but the sort of general disposition in Canada towards the current U.S. administration is rather precarious, I would say. And we are always here at City Talk reminding everybody that we all at the local level work on very similar issues and have very similar shared challenges. And back to the empathy discussion, we have a lot of empathy for Americans working in American communities and in American neighborhoods and Canadians working in Canadian neighborhoods or Europeans working. We all have a kind of kinship, I think, and an empathy for one another about what we're all trying to do, which is create great places that work for people and work for everyone. So
Yeah.
I'm going to now bring in Mehedi, and then we'll have everybody come back on. Just again, encouraging people on the chat. There's a toggle that you have to, and Wes, who is indomitable, hi Wes, who is Sarah's former colleague for Jane's Walk, is posting lots of books, but only the panelists are seeing them, Wes. So you've got to repost to everyone. So if everybody could just, when you're posting in the chat, and I always encourage people, post in the chat. Lots of people are on for the ride and don't always read the chat or post in it, but we want everybody to post. Come on, go crazy. So, but when you do, do it to everybody so that everybody can see them. And Mehedi, how nice to have you. Welcome to City Talk. Tell us your particular interest in the work of Jane Jacobs and in Jane's Walk and what perspective you bring to it.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be talking about Jane and kind of hear what the other panelists have to say as well too. So I think I first got involved with Jane's Walk in 2020. I was one of the festival organizers that year, and if you folks remember, this was 2020 pandemic, and this was the first ever global Jane's Walk that was doing fully online, right? So we shifted, I think, a month and a half into May. So I think around April or end of February, switching to a fully physical walk to an online walk, right? And kudos to the steering committee at that time that really helped us shape the online walk because things were much, much different, right? We forget we were at a time where 6 feet social distancing was a practice. Everything was closed. You couldn't go to public parks. Different time in the world. That said, I think we were really unique in making a lot of online walks. We did these great type of podcasts, virtual walks, self-guided walks, and really pivoted the conversation of walks not necessarily having to be physical walks. And back now in 2025, I'm also the Jane's Walk Festival organizer with my good friend and colleague Igor Samardzik. And we're helping lead, I think, such a great walk. I think Sarah earlier alluded to the fantastic numbers we're getting with kind of compared to the previous years. But also, I think this year is really special because we've inputted a great creative dynamic and refresh. We really tried to make walks really refreshing with our different animations of Jane Jacobs. These fun little characters. If you go on our website, you'll see Jane Jacobs riding a bicycle, being on a megaphone, taking a picture in a Raptors jersey. And I say this knowing that there's some few folks with New York here who do have a better basketball team at the moment.
Just saying.
But at the moment at
At
least.
the moment.
That said, though, I think besides my formal work with Jane Jacobs as an organizer, I think she was more important to me as a young man growing up in Regent Park and going through neighborhood revitalization and neighborhood change. It was actually her work that really inspired me to challenge top-down planning practice and what it meant for community to be involved in the planning practice. So that kind of led to a great and so far excellent career in planning and working in development and kind of doing some of the fun work I do now as the co-founder of Muslims in Public Space, where we work at the intersection of public art, public space, and Muslim identities. And our goal is pretty simple. How do we get folks who haven't historically been part of the planning process to be part of the planning process by redesigning public parks, by being involved with the art that's involved with public parks and feeling seen and maybe challenging stereotypes and maybe fostering conversations of inclusivity in planning. So Jane holds a really special place in my kind of planning practice, but also just everyday civic life and engagement.
Fantastic. You know, I want you and I to have our own city talk subsequently. Let's plan about this.
Sure, no worries.
About the Islamic city and Islamic design, because I know that's one of your interests.
Absolutely.
And Jane herself had an interest in sort of patterns. I can see that Wes has posted Christopher Alexander's work on the pattern language, and the Islamic city is all predicated on a particular kind of elegant design that has served cities well. And whenever I go up to the Aga Khan Museum, I'm always struck by that those all got that imagery. So we should do one on that. Let's do one on that, shall we?
Absolutely.
Meet you back here again sometime soon. Okay, well, let's have everybody's screen come alive here, and I appreciate that all sorts of people are posting where where people can sign up for Jane's Walks. We've got them in Ottawa and Winnipeg and someplace in Kansas. I gotta find it. So, but this is the great thing is that a Jane's Walk can take place pretty much anywhere. And it can be, and actually sometimes I remember years ago, I don't know if it's still on the Toronto list, there was one that in Grange Park that I think Max Allen led, and I don't think you walked at all. I think you stood in Grange Park and you looked north, and there was conversation. And then I think you pivoted and looked east, and then I'm just remembering, and there was conversation. So sometimes these are the crazy, wacky ideas that people come up with. And I saw someone Sarah posted that she ran one in the first year of Jane's Walk in Leslieville, and she got a whole bunch of businesses on side, and people went and got snacks and treats, and the small business vendors were happy to have people come in, and so that part's kind of cool. That they all are quite different, aren't they? And we just sort of let imagination go crazy. We're getting some questions in the chat, which I think are worthy for us to think about. Let's talk about this one. And I'll try to get to them all if I can. In your experience, when you have a Jane's Walk or you're running a festival with a whole bunch of Jane's Walks, what do you think happens afterwards? Do you have any kind of evidence of what happens other than people have a great time? But you know what I mean? Do you see any particular follow-up? Who wants to take that one first? What's the potential follow-up? Go ahead, Genevieve.
In a more literal sense, I'll start out.
Sure.
When we are training our walk leaders, we suggest that they end their walk at, a cafe, a bar, a place where they can congregate and continue the conversation, because I think that just in general is like a great model for it all starts during the walk, but maybe we can talk one-on-one, maybe we can talk about things besides this topic, or I feel that everyone who often goes on these walks either is really passionate about the same topic as the leader or wants to learn more. So we love when people are able to, in a physical sense, stay together after the walk, and continue the conversation, as we say. And ideally, when that happens, maybe people are sharing phone numbers, sharing emails, and are able to, network and connect with each other, either to become friends or to do work together if they work in the same industry. Yeah.
I always, here's an idea. You heard it here first. Somebody on the chat, please go away and do this. Or let's do it collectively. Let's write Jane's Walk or Jane Jacobs for Dummies, because there are so many great concepts that Jane introduced that people don't necessarily even realize were hers, which is fabulous because that doesn't matter. But the idea is that she came up with something, and one of them was self-organization. She was the early identifier of self-organization, saw it in nature, saw it in economic life, and said it's a key to really urban vitality is allowing self-organization. So as you just suggest, Genevieve, they end up going to a bar, and then they end up sharing cell phone numbers, and then they end up going on Instagram together, and then who knows? So some of it we don't know, but I'm wondering if there are follow-ups that we do know. Go ahead, Adam, your hand's up.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say too, I think if people aren't sticking together at the end, I think one of the things that we, maybe it's speculative, but I think I've seen it happen is that these stories are shared in very informal ways afterwards because if people are attending Jane's Walks to kind of learn more information about their neighborhoods, all of a sudden they're becoming more familiar with them. They know the stories themselves. They're sharing it to their spouse, who's sharing it to their kid, who's sharing it to their friend. Like I think obviously that's why it's speculative, is you're never really going to know that impact, but I do imagine I'd love to map out the ways that these kind of stories informally kind of grow and change based on just that one kind of walking event.
Yeah, what it catalyzes. Kathy Crow, who's a frequent city talker, hi Kathy, has put into the chat here that she uses them in as part of her teaching, and that the community is the classroom, and that's in essence what we're also reinforcing, aren't we? That experiential learning is a really critical part of this process that Jane's Walk illustrates. Sarah, any thoughts on this about what follow-up you've observed, or that you, or B, as you suggested, maybe there's follow-up that we would all like to do that we haven't had a chance to do. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we also sort of lean into a little bit some of the activism roots as well. So something that was really popular here during when we had that big conversation about Ontario Place and how we, take care of our public spaces and what that means and what it means to have a community come together and really advocate and be passionate about protecting these public spaces. There was actually a petition that was handed out afterwards. And so I think there's also opportunities to sort of really tap into what folks are thinking about, what they're feeling about, what's kind of currently on everyone's mind, and finding tools of bringing those conversations to places where they need to be heard. So how can you get into like a council meeting? How can you talk to counselors? Like, how can you get those decision makers to listen to folks? I think that's something that's really, really great about Jane's Walk too, is like, for like collecting these thoughts and feelings that folks have that may not have another way or another opportunity of expressing them, right? Like, I think even just having folks come out in like huge numbers is also indicative of like, this is something that folks care about. Let's figure out ways of how we can then continue this work.
It's like a form of community organizing, really. You all, hey guys, unless you have a barking dog or a crying baby, just open your mics. Just everybody open them. You like the old days where we all could just talk when we want to, rather than having to unmute and all that stuff. Mehedi, in your experience, any thoughts on what the follow-up, do you find that Jane's Walk is an interesting beginning of a conversation? Does it give you then a sort of opportunity to have an ongoing one?
Certainly, I think, at the crux of what Jane Jacobs is about is dialogue, right?
Right.
And sometimes that dialogue means that having, to be honest, uncomfortable conversations about tension sometimes, right? And I think what I find really valuable in some of Jane's walks that I go to myself is having a conversation about a topic that I never knew too much about and an issue that I wasn't fully aware about, right? But the big part of it is that I think being able to say to yourself, yes, you're going to be part of the conversation and listen to what other folks have to say and contribute to, I think, the outcome of what do we do after this, right? And I think Sarah and others alluded to the fact that a lot of Jane's work is rooted in politics. It was very political at that time, right?
Yeah.
And, some of that, I think, when we talk about Jane's Walk, it's really easy to gloss over that sometimes and just, talk about different neighborhood stories and storytelling, which is all important. But there are some issues that are happening on the ground that people really want to amplify. And you do that by talking with it, but then you do that by what Sarah's saying, protesting. You do that with working with the
Uh,
counselor.
and
Yep.
a lot of the walks, I'm sure someone is asking in the chat here, can you have a theme for a walk? Angela, they almost all do. Angela's asked this, Angela Jones. Just go to a listing, you'll see they almost all do. And as Mehdi is suggesting, often these walks are organized around some historic protest. I know that in New York, Genevieve, you
Mhm.
had one often about Stonewall and about sort of gay rights. And Celia, I suspect in Toronto, and maybe Sarah knows better, I'm pretty sure that we've had them in Toronto over the years around those issues as well. And then people I know do tend to, one of the things that I always want us to encourage us to challenge ourselves is to make sure that our walks aren't only in built up areas of the city. Let's have them in parts of the city that have struggled and haven't had the level of investment. And I'm sure in those cases, they're being used as community organizing opportunities to enlighten somebody about a particular injustice or something that's not functioning well. Am I fair? Am I right, Celia? Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say, I mean, so many stories are coming to mind
Sure.
I heard through through my thesis, interviews and just in general, like connecting with the group of founders and people who really got Jane's Walk started or were friends of Jane. And I think, it can be from an activist lens, so to speak, but it can also be, you know, challenging certain stigmas of certain neighborhoods or certain areas of the city. Like I
Yeah.
know, Jane's Walk has gone through quite the evolution in terms of its governance. And it's probably not apparent on the outside because what you see is the same. It's, people in cities leading walks about whatever topic they like. But there was a time where we had paid staff, whereas now we're fully volunteer driven and volunteer run. And I think back in the day when we did have paid staff, like a thing we do it now as best we can. But one thing we were really, really good at was going to the suburbs and going to places outside the downtown core and really trying to build
Mhm.
connections with people there and say, we want to hear your stories. People want to hear your stories. Your stories are worth telling. And we had, I mean, there was one example of a story that one of the folks involved with Jane's Walk on the steering committee in the past told me where it was a student from a school who led this walk in Scarborough, and it was a school where there had been a shooting recently, I think. So it was in the news, and there was a lot of people were like, "Oh, that's a dangerous place. Don't go
Mhm.
there. Wow, that must be a rough area." And people attended this Jane's Walk with this student talking about this school, and it's again, Jane's Walks they're meant to be more like walking conversations, and I think that's what this one really was. And this individual, this student, when talking about her school, she said, "This is actually the most welcoming space I've encountered, and I've met so many incredible friends, and
That's great.
it's the first place where I've felt like, I was sitting by myself at lunch, and people said, 'Hey, why are you alone? Come eat with us,' kind of thing." So I think there's a lot to be said about the potential for Jane's Walk to also challenge the stigma, negative stigma in certain areas, and to make people think very differently
Differently.
about,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, about certain parts
Well,
of the city.
I'm interested too about the balance have you all, each of you led a walk? Have you all been leaders of walks? And you've been on walks, obviously. Question about do you find that the people that are on the walk are from the local neighborhood or have they come from away? Or are they a mix? Mahedi, is it a mix?
I certainly do think it's a mix. I think particularly when it comes to a lot of the more bigger urban issues, that tends to be a mix, right? Because people want to know what's happening. So, for example,
Right,
even for myself, I signed up for a walk that's happening on Saturday on May 3rd, uh, going through the history of Eglinton's West is Little Jamaica in Toronto, right? A
right,
neighborhood that's facing massive revitalization, urban change, part of the LRT that's getting built there, right?
right,
And I'm interested because I think for a long time, what I've heard, and somebody who grew up in downtown, not from that part of the city, is that the displacement is mostly with the businesses and also with the homes and the people who live there. But what people often don't talk about is cultural displacement. And I think
right,
what I'm excited to hear about is, yes, how does cultural displacement through public investment happen? The reason why I'm attending is because the issue that's happening in Eglinton West is happening all over the city, different
right,
parts of the city. So what
right,
you take out of a Jane's Walk is the learning of, well, what is, for example, the community land trust that's there in Little Jamaica? What are they
right,
doing because of this? How are they working with the planning process, with the city planning team? and also or other ways where they're resisting this and ensuring that that culture is kept, right? Because urban change is going to happen all across the city in different pockets, right? We
Mhm.
take different learnings from different parts of the city.
There's let's keep on the topics that are being raised in the chat. Here's a more serious one. Well, listen, they're all serious. Questions are all serious, but here is a serious one around the sanitization of public spaces and the relationship around design, I guess. And some of you are in the design field, and um, this notion that sometimes public design and public and planning steers produces designs that are not don't lend themselves to people walking or hanging around or having an experience. Adam, in Calgary, you've got a whole lot of redevelopment going on there. Is Jane's Walk an opportunity to kind of come to terms with that? What is the role of design, making things walkable or not, or hang
Yeah.
out or not? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going through a bit of a phase right now of, I think, some demolition companies are definitely making some money right now. I think in 1 week our Eau Claire Mall got torn down because it had
Yeah.
been kind of derelict for a while. Our Olympic Plaza, some people saw it as not functioning entirely correctly, so they fully flattened that and have now proposed a full brand new park space there. And that park specifically was a place that a lot of people that were sleeping rough were gathering during the day and chatting and hanging out. So yeah, no, I definitely think some of these places in Calgary that are going under the full start from flat building up again definitely brings up some of those conversations. And
I'm sure you're
yeah.
gonna, and people will say, where did that building go? What about encampments? Are encampments featuring in any of your walks? Are walks actually including people that are living in encampments, or encampments part of you have several in Calgary, Adam. Is that on the radar, do you think, for the Jane's Walk community?
I wouldn't say we have any directly on there, but definitely in those areas, like our East Village is a place that is
Yep.
going through a lot of revitalization right now. And
Yep.
that's where our drop-in exists, but it's also matched with that. So I think, there's quite a few walks led within that space. So those discussions will
Are going to happen.
come up naturally, which I think is maybe a better way for it to occur, is kind of in that natural people talking to each other rather than a specific theme kind of being brought to this
Right.
area.
Right.
So yeah, no, I think Calgary, there's definitely themes of that in the way that we're taking away these public spaces and trying to make them better, but in the end, are they being made better? That's kind of the discussion that I think is really important to have.
Genevieve, I'm sure in New York this is surfacing because there are so
Yeah.
many contested issues in New York, and your walks must be walking right through them, right?
Oh my gosh, so many of them, which is
Yeah.
exciting, and also like really is in the spirit of the Municipal Art Society, because a lot of this is like a lot of the walks are like policy related and citizens being like, what is happening? There's actually there's a rezoning that started in 2021 in this neighborhood called Gowanus along the Gowanus Canal, which is like a post-industrial area that is currently undergoing a lot of change. And there's this walk that has been led a few times, including this year, that's called like What's Going On in Gowanus, just
Right.
pretty simple title. But that one, yeah, is about how people are a little bit disappointed with some of the development that's going down there. It's a canal, it's a waterfront, it's being cleaned actively, it is polluted, but there are opportunities to make it accessible and make it a great place to be, but some citizens, myself included, are like, I don't know if everything they're doing here is really accomplishing what we need. And then similarly, there is an anniversary of a rezoning in Williamsburg, which is also in Brooklyn, on the East River, and it's the 20th anniversary of this rezoning. So a few people are leading walks, kind of thinking about how the neighborhood has changed in the face of this rezoning, and what the future of the community is. So yeah.
Again, part of the Jacobs sort of series of things that are going to be in that Jacobs book for dummies is this idea that we can find a way to broker dissent. So you don't all on walks, you don't always have people that agree with each other. They see things differently. And I would think it's one of the sort of skills of the walk leader that they've got to be able to know that they're going to have people that disagree with them. It's kind of like walking democracy. Tell me what you've done to recruit. Somebody's asked a question. what are the challenges to recruiting new walk leaders, and how do you make sure that they're not just coming from one particular community? Mahedi, have you had you've done it for a number of years now. Obviously, you're trying to make sure you've got a diversity of leader. Any tips on how to get new walk leaders from communities that might not necessarily put their hands up to volunteer?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, you know what, the best thing I've learned is this concept of meeting people where they're at,
Yeah.
right? If you really want to get folks in the suburbs, in the inner suburbs of Toronto, whether it's Thorncliffe, Scarborough, North Etobicoke, you got to meet them where they're at. And for a lot of folks, that doesn't necessarily mean City Hall or anything equivalent of a public city building. It could be a plaza that has a lot of retail businesses. It could be a racialized faith-based space that has a community center where folks attend on a weekly basis.
Yep.
Those are the places you got to be at to ensure that you get those folks part of the conversation. And I think this year we've done a pretty good job of ensuring that, where, you know, we're spreading word of the mouth, going to those spaces and speaking with people. And I think we've had a pretty diverse number of walks, making sure we hit each borough of Toronto. But again, I think it goes back to this idea of meeting people where they're at, right? And it's just like how Jane had this idea of a sidewalk ballet, right? You don't get to interact with somebody on a sidewalk unless you're there. So you got to be there first.
I suspect a lot of you have walks that you're offering in different languages too. They're not always English, right? And
Absolutely.
and the other challenge that we have is sadly, we have many neighborhoods where there's no sidewalk to walk on. So I was with my sister at Easter. She lives in a small community, and I'm just astonished that there's no sidewalk. Like, what was the city thinking? Anyway, so you have to make sure it's safe. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Mahedi's great point there that we also really lean into this idea that everybody is an expert in their own experience.
Right. That's another little item for the dummies book. Everybody's an expert.
Quite a few workshops with folks, and the question that we always get
do you call them workshops?
Yes, sorry, we call them workshops. So
100%.
they're workshops on how to lead walks.
Workshops, I love it.
Turned it into a workshop.
Okay.
And one of the questions we get from folks a lot of times is, what if I don't know what I'm talking about? Or I don't know like the history, or I don't know what this means, or I don't know. And so we really lean into this idea that you are an expert in your own life. You are an expert in your own experiences in the city. You are an expert in the way that you sort of live your life and the places that you go to and your routines and your experiences. And so we really try and tell folks, you don't need to be a planner. You don't need to be like an urban designer. You don't need to have this really formalized education in order to lead a walk. Like, your walk could be about your favorite places in the neighborhood. Your walk could be about, you know, your favorite pieces of sidewalk art. Your walk could really be about like maybe a tree in your neighborhood that you really like.
Yeah.
So we really just try and like really, that's one of our main principles that we really, really lean into, is that everybody and anybody could lead a walk. And it's really important to surface those voices and those experiences and make sure that everyone gets a chance to participate.
Absolutely. And also that so much about, again, Jacob's was that she was an observer. So a lot of her work was about listening. And so I think to tell a walk leader, you don't actually have to do a lot of telling. You can just ask some good questions and then see what happens. And invariably, there'll be somebody. I notice in the chat, people are talking about how people come back to their neighborhood. They may have lived there years ago and they come back to see it. Kind of cool. And then suddenly somebody who lived there 45 years ago is saying, well, you know, it used to be a this. So the collective wisdom that you've got gathering in these walks, eh? Well, as you know, as you think now about the sort of general sort of economic uncertainty that we're living in now, and I think the challenges, particularly to another area of Jane's interest, which was independent businesses, Main Street businesses. Thoughts on how you think the Jane's Walk themes will look like next week? What will the tone be? I know we're all hoping for nice weather. But what else? What do you think? Adam, Calgary's at a particular juncture. Downtown's going through stuff. You've got transit investments doing things. What do you think the sort of overarching kind of mood's going to be?
Yeah, I think that local economy piece is definitely going to be a big one. And I think I always like bringing it down to just the hyper local scale. I went to local chat here that was all just surrounding the theme of borrowing an egg from a neighbor, and we talked for like an hour and a half about borrowing eggs from neighbors and how that's changed and why we do it and why we don't do it. So I think that's what I like. That would be another metric I would love to collect from Jane's walks, is ask people before and after the walk, how likely are you to borrow an egg from a neighbor? Because I think we talk about we talk about empathy, we talk about trust, we talk about familiarity and kind of recognizable elements within neighborhoods. And I think Jane's Walk promotes all of that. And especially when you are bringing together, really local regions together and people from these regions all together, I think when I think about local economy, it means both supporting your local corner stores, your local coffee shops, but also what does it look like to support each other on that really small local economy scale, to the point where you can once again go knock on someone's door and borrow some sugar or borrow a cup of milk.
Yeah. Celia, what about in the UK? I know that London itself is obviously going through lots of post-COVID adjustments still, and you obviously have not escaped the dynamic between Canada and the United States, so you're familiar with it. What do you think the sense will be of Jane's Walks in the UK next week, or in London?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. I don't think there will be a festival next week in London, UK. There was one last year, but the organizers aren't leading one this year, as far as I know. So, but I will say, what I was going to say, or what came to mind, with that question was, you know, like both in Toronto and in last year's London's festival, when I was able to attend it, there were walks that featured, like, there was one in particular in Toronto that was called The World in 10 Blocks. And it was based on a documentary. It was the filmmakers who then kind of did a walk based on their documentary, and they talked to shop owners, mostly those who had migrated to Toronto, and they talked to them about their experience. And so it was kind of a mix of like hearing their stories, but then also familiarizing the people on the walk with these businesses and with their shops. And similarly in London, that last year at least, there were sort of similar themes. There was one that was focused on like Elephant and Castle, kind of like South London, where again it was talking a lot about like local shopkeepers who, unfortunately, due to gentrification and developments, were being kind of forced out. And so we met some of those folks as well and heard their stories, either directly or through the walk leaders. So I'd say, yeah, those in terms of like local businesses and things like that, that's sort of what came to mind. And yeah, certainly if there were a Jane's Walk festival happening in London this year, I mean, there would be, like, the political landscape has changed so much, even in the past year. We've got, like, there have been 14 years of austerity, there's a new government in. So yeah, I'm sure there would be very, very interesting walks, but still the dialogue is
You can
happening.
still, there's still time. You could post a London walk and just
It's true.
just go out your back door and see who comes to join you. Some of the best walks, people are always, oh, I want to have a lot of people in my walk. Well, actually, you don't. You want to be able to have an intimate conversation, right? Sarah, as you look to the festival, so it can be 3 people, is what I'm getting. It could be just you. Sarah, as you're thinking about getting excited about next week, what do you think is going to be the theme? And then I'm going to go around and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's this sense of coming together. I think sort of given the political landscape, the elections that are coming up, sort of the things that everyone's thinking about. I think there's a real sense that folks want to be in community. And I think that's given, like, considering we have like a huge number of walks this year, and folks are really wanting to get out, wanting to connect with each other, wanting to just sort of, I would say, like, reaffirm what it means to be in community, what cohesion means, like what it means to be neighborly, what it means to be like hyper local, what it means to connect with others, even if they're, different. And I think that's going to be, it's sort of like an everything and nothing theme at the same time. But I think folks are really looking towards just being together and sort of like, this is what it means to be this is what it means to be a Torontonian. This is what it means to be, someone who lives in the beaches or someone who lives in Scarborough, and sort of what identity and community, like sort of those informal social capital bonds that keep us together.
Yeah. Mehedi.
Yeah, I think I was just gonna, Sarah explained it beautifully. I think the only thing I was gonna add is that for this year, our theme actually is walk with us. Like a big
Walk
part of
with us.
our
I love
walk
that.
with us. Yeah, it's a big part
Yeah.
of our marketing this year is this kind of open invitation, right?
Yeah.
And I think Sarah talked about kind of in general, I think the different tensions and different political landscapes. And Toronto is such a multicultural city. It is so different and beautiful in the same way. The
Mhm.
idea of somebody inviting you to a walk feels like they're inviting you to their home, right?
Yeah.
And when we get that invitation, what do we say? We feel already, oh wow, I'm invited to something. I can be part of something without even knowing that person. So I
Mhm.
think our theme this year is walk with us because we want an open invitation.
I love that. Walk with us. Genevieve, what do you think the tone's going to be in New York? You've got so much
Um,
going on. What do you think?
yeah, we do. Yeah, I feel
And
similar to
in
what.
Canada, we will have just had a federal election. So
Oh gosh.
a lot of people have been walking out on doorsteps. They've been walking with a particular kind of thing in their minds. But anyway, go
Right.
ahead, Genevieve. What do you think in New York the mood will be?
Yeah, I feel similar to Mehdi and Sarah. That was beautifully said. Yeah, we have, the presidential election that happened, and we have the primary for our mayoral election happening in June.
Right.
So I know there's, some defeat, but also some excitement and hope with the mayoral election happening. So it's kind of a mixture of those two emotions, I would say. But I feel like we have a lot of community members and community nonprofits that are leading walks this year a bit more than last year, which
Hmm.
is a really good
Yeah.
sign.
Great.
But I think also maybe a theme of reflection. We have quite a few sound walks that were submitted this year. So walks that put an emphasis on just observing and hearing.
Listening.
The space around you, yeah, and listening. So listening in the sound walk sense, but also, of course, listening in general at the festival. Yeah, so I would say reflection is a good theme for us. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, listen, it's just I could just hang with you guys for another hour and a half and talk about what about this and could we try that and are you thinking of this? So let's do it. Let's meet a year from now, and let's check in again on where Jane's Walk is evolving as it grows and as people do different things and try different things. Thank you very much for joining us. People are putting into the chat some last references. Again, if you want, we'll publish this chat, so all the books you'll see them, all the videos you can look them up. We'll post next week. I hope everybody on this call is going to get themselves to a Jane's Walk somewhere. Or maybe they're going to get themselves to two or three, since now it's a festival and it spans 3 days. You can go see a film, do a panel, go on a couple of walks, and just take your eyes to the street. And what a wonderful legacy this is for Jane Jacobs. So Mehedi, Sarah, Adam, Genevieve, and Celia, thank you for joining us and sharing with us how this movement continues to grow. COI is really supportive. We have a session next week. Just a heads up to all you regular City Talkers, it's on Wednesday, the 30th. We're breaking with tradition, but we're doing it with the shift, and it's about tents and encampments and how do we rethink the future of that. And then we've got some coming up in May, which will be about my Main Street and local businesses and also the future of faith places on Main Street. So lots of interesting programming ahead. But again, thanks. May 2 to 4. Take your eyes to the street. Enjoy a Jane's Walk. Thanks again for being part of this. Really
Thank
great to see
you.
you all. Have a
Thank
great Jane's
you.
Festival.
Thank you so much.